Harihi Om. Om Gajananam Bhudaganadisevidam Kavittajambho Balasarabakshitham Umasudam Sogha Vinashakaranam Namami Vigneshwarapadapankajam Vam Shrim Hrim Klim Ganeshwaraya Brahmasvarupaya Charave Sarvasiddhi Pradeshaya Vigneshaya Namo Namaha Om Sahanao Bhavatu Sahanao Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamatstu Mavitvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Gurave Sarvalokanam Visaje Pavaroginaha Nudaye Sarvavidyanam Sri Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Om Sri Dakshinamurtaye Divya Kamalajarana Vindabhyam Namo Namaha. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om, Hari Om. Sai Ram, and welcome to what is already week 6 on the journey that feels like we've just started, right? We're almost just slightly more than 1/3 of the way. So we've looked at, in the first week, the introduction to the Vedas and the placement of the Upanishads. And then in the second week, we ventured into the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. The third week, we went to Chandogya Upanishad. In the fourth week, we went to Taittiriya Upanishad. Last week, we looked at Aitareya Upanishad. And this week, week 6, we're looking at Kausitaki Upanishad. Kausitaki Upanishad. When was it created, or when was it authored? When was it written? You know, between the 6th and the 5th century BCE. You know, some writers say, you know, some Western writers say it's about 800 BCE, but it is considered to be part of the Mukhya Upanishads, the significant Upanishads, and it relates directly to the Rig-veda. As you know, every Upanishad has a Vedic umbrella, and this one comes under the Rig-veda, and it is a smaller version. The Kausitaki Upanishad is also known as the Kausitaki Brahmana Upanishad, which is part of the bigger Kausitaki Aranyaka. So the Kausitaki Aranyaka has got 15 chapters, but the Kausitaki Upanishad, right, has only got 4 chapters. And this is a little bit of brief. You know, it's a little bit more brief than the actual Kausitaki Brahmana Aranyaka. You know, the focus, of course, is 2 things: Atman and Brahman. Right? Are they the same? Atman and Brahman, are they the same? Interesting, right? Of course, the biggest commentator on the Upanishads is, of course, Adi Shankaracharya. Now, the central verse that is the focus or focal point of Kausitaki Upanishad is something called Prana and Prajna. Prana is Prajna, Prajna is Prana. That's what it's saying. What is Prana? Prana is life force. You know, as they say, Pranam means, you know, you check if somebody is alive, you check the breathing, isn't it? As long as the prana is there, you know the life force is there. So prana is prajna. What is prajna? Prajna is consciousness. So basically prana is prajna, prajna is prana means life force is consciousness and consciousness is life force. Right, of course, and the authorship of this Upanishad is attributed to Rishi Kausitaki. I'll be saying something about him in a while later. So like I said, this Upanishad is part of the Rig-veda, and it's considered to be part of a greater work, like I said, the Kausitaki Aranyaka, which is 15 chapters, and then Rishi Kausitaki, what he took the central essence and made it into the Kausitaki Upanishad, which is the 4 chapters, right? Now, this Upanishad is quite metaphysical in its approach, in its character, right? But it discusses 3 questions, right? It discusses 3 central questions. The first one is, does the soul exist? Right? And then it answers the question. So if so, how does it transmigrate? And how is the soul reborn? And many times you may have heard people talk about, oh, it's my soul. I know my soul. They talk about the soul as though it is a part of the anatomy. So Kausitaki injects some clarity into that sort of false sense of, belief or placed belief. The second focus is where it is asking whether the soul and the God are one, or are they distinct entities? Hence, the focus I said to you earlier is Atman and Brahman. And thirdly, such as how individual souls can realize that they are Brahman, that is the ultimate soul or eternal being, right? Pratyaksham Brahma, Aham Brahmasmi, Prajnanam Brahma, Ayam Atman Brahma, Tattvam Asi. All these are the central focuses. The four Vedas have each got one central theme, right? Ayam Atman Brahma, Tattvam Asi, Prajnanam Brahma, and Aham Brahmasmi. 4. So in short, the Kausitaki asks this question. Number one, whether the soul exists, and if so, how does it transmigrate or is reborn? It's a very interesting question. And then it asks, soul and God, are they one or are they distinct? And thirdly, it says, can souls realize that they are actually Brahman? It's not talking about you as an individual, yeah? It's not talking about you as an individual. It's talking about the soul, and whether, having asked whether the soul and God are one, it's asking, how can individual souls realize that they are indeed that supreme ultimate soul, that supreme eternal being called Brahman, right? So technically, if you look at Kausitaki, it explores the heavenly world where the soul, all the transmigration, eternal being, ultimate, all that happens, reincarnation, consciousness. Heavenly world, reincarnation, and consciousness is the content of this Upanishad called Kausitaki Upanishad, right? Now, some people say it was written, during the period where Upanishads were being written, probably the same time as the Aitareya Upanishad and the Taittiriya Upanishad. But other scholars think that it was written in line, right, in a lineage, probably after Brihadaranyaka, after Chandogya, after Taittiriya, and then Aitareya, and then Kausitaki. So when I initially planned this series of talks, I looked at how they flew, right? How they flowed in terms of time. And that is why I have put each Upanishad at a time when they are created, the first being Brihadaranyaka, and then followed by the Chandogya, followed by the, Taittiriya, Aitareya, like that. So it was probably, some of the people think it's before pre-Buddhism, some even think it's before Jainism, before the Jainist literature came into being. But then again, as I always say, it is not who wrote it, it is not when it was written, but what can you take away from it to evolve from your state of consciousness that you are in to a higher state of consciousness that you ought to be in, right? Remember, that should be the attitude. And I've always said attitude will give you the kind of aptitude that will take you to a different altitude, right? So let me look at the 4 chapters first generically, and then I'll delve into each chapter specifically, right? This is the usual style. So the first chapter is actually talking about birth, rebirth, and the transmigration of the Atman, of the self. Now, this is asserted as being completely existent, right? And that's also very interestingly, right? If you think karma as a concept is, it's just a concept that is spoken about, well, let me tell you, the first chapter of the Kausitaki Upanishad actually talks about karma, concept of karma, right? And it says man's life is verily affected by karma, karmic deeds, karmic actions, karmic thoughts, karmic words, karmic actions, right? And whether one gets liberation from the freedom of the cycle of birth and death depends on the karmic fruits of each of his life. And the distance between him, the Jivatma, realizing that he is the Paramatma, is that karmic fruits, the difference. So that's the first chapter. The second chapter talks about each life and all lives as being part of that universal self, that eternal being called Brahman. And it says, right, when I go through it in detail, specifically, you'll understand. It says, to the extent that each person realizes that his very being is identical with Brahman, to that extent, he is Brahman. So by implication, it means if you don't know, if you don't realize, if you're not conscious of the fact that you are actually Brahman, then you are not. But this is the difference between someone who evolves spiritually, at a certain speed, and someone who remains at the level of, Brahman is something totally detached, something abstract, something utopian, so to speak. Right? I mean, again, the second chapter and the correlation between what I found, right, during my research, was the correlation between the second chapter and what Adi Shankara says, I think is in verse 10 or 11 in his Bhajagovindam. It's fantastic. I mean, the synchronicity between the thought process between Kausitaki Rishi when he wrote the Upanishad and Shankaracharya when he wrote the Bhajagovindam is just fantastic, right? Anyway, Kausitaki second chapter says, those who do not understand their Atman, they blindly serve their senses. They blindly serve their cravings. They worship the without. They worship the without. And in contrast, those who understand their Atman, they do not serve their senses. They serve their Atman, and they are the ones who live holistically. The third chapter then goes on to talk about, remember I said, it asks one question, is the soul and God the same? So this one talks about the personification of God as the soul, or the personification of the soul as the God. It's a rather philosophical basis, but it talks about the Atman and the Brahman as being one and the same, right? And then it also talks about dependency on sense-based objects or sense organs can give you the psychological power to control the mind, right? Whether you are dependent on sense-based objects or on your sense organs, or you can detach yourself from these, that will give you what we call, integrative psychological power to control the mind. Okay, so that's chapter 3, and chapter 3 is it refers to Lord Indra. As you know, Indra is the king of the Devas, and it refers to conversation between Lord Indra and one of the Kshatriyas whose soul has evolved to Devaloka. So I'll say more about that when I talk about chapter 3 in a few minutes. And the fourth chapter is actually builds upon what was said in the third chapter with a bit more explanation of what Brahman is. So in general, that is what the 4 chapters talk about. So let us go to the first chapter. The first chapter probably reflects some aspect of social dimension during the Vedic period, as it happened then. And it talks about the interaction, right, between the 2 top castes, namely the Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas. So the first chapter actually talks about someone called Udalaka Aruni, who was a Brahmin, and he was well versed in, Aruni. I've spoken about this before. Aruni and his son, Shwetaketu. I think 2 weeks ago I spoke about this, Aruni. So again, this Kausitaki also refers to Aruni. So Aruni was a well-versed Vedic scholar, right? But he was not able to get the secret knowledge of the Upanishads, although he was very well learned, very well, high-ranking scholar in the Vedas. But there was a Kshatriya called Gargyayani, just like the goddess Katyayani. This is Gargyayani. Yeah? Gargyayani, even though he was a Kshatriya, he had mastered the secret knowledge of the Upanishads regarding the afterlife, not in this life, but in the afterlife. But Aruni did not know, and Shvetaketu told his father, why don't you go and become the Kshatriya's disciple? See, this is what I said, this shows the interaction. Sometimes the Kshatriyas, like you see in Mahabharata and Ramayana, they went to the Brahmin Gurukula and they learned all this. But there are lots of references that says the Brahmins also went to Kshatriyas, certain types of Kshatriyas who was able to give them that knowledge, right? So it was, knowledge does not mean it only comes from one source. And this is the other point, right? Knowledge can come from anyone, If you look at, God has given that knowledge in nature itself, right? So let me ask you, when you see a lion, a lion moving slowly and then hunting, chasing its prey and then killing its prey and then eating and then moving away, what is the lesson? As an observer, what do you learn? The same time, when you see a monkey, what do you learn? When you see a crow, what do you learn? When you see a peacock, what do you learn? When you see a cow, what do you learn? When you see a pig, what do you learn? Everything teaches you something. See, it's all to do with character and characteristics and attitude, right? If you look at just give you one or two examples before I move on. If you look at the lion will hunt only when it is hungry. And it may kill a big gazelle if you like, right? But it will only eat a small portion, just enough to feed its hunger. That is why when the king of the jungle goes hunting, all the other animals are happy because they know he will only eat a little bit, that's enough for him, and he will leave the rest of it to whoever comes. That is why when the lion is hunting and eating, all the other animals are waiting, even though it's, vultures, birds, other little animals in the jungle. So it teaches you to have the quality of character that is enough, the realization, So eating, the eating habit. Going back to Taittiriya Upanishad, right? 2 weeks ago, I spoke about Annamaya Kosha. This is it, eat enough, and you will never overeat. But you must get into that practice. Okay. So if you look at the monkey never sits still. And whatever you give it, the first thing it will do is take it apart, right? And then once it's taken it apart, there's nothing else, so it throws. Everything is the same attitude, right? It doesn't keep and save like these squirrels. If you give them a nut, they don't destroy it straight away. They take it and they save it and they store it, and then they will eat it when the time is right. So everything that happens in life, whether you're watching a person, you watch a beggar, what does it teach you? A beggar who's begging. It should teach you the character of gratefulness, gratitude, that you have enough. It should also inculcate the awareness to give, right? That doesn't mean you must encourage begging. What I mean is, you give the right sort of sustenance, right? At the end of the day, what do beggars want? They want food, they want drink, or they want clothes. Just give them that, and not money, because with money, other things can come into play. So the point of this chapter 1 is Aruni, who was a great Vedic scholar, Brahmin by nature, went to a Kshatriya called Gargyayani to learn the Vedas, right? So He had to go and learn it in person. It doesn't matter which class you belong to, right? But the knowledge of the Upanishads had to be taught in person. Hence, the Gurukulas were formed in order to facilitate that. And it was customary in the ancient times. You just don't go, today, the modern days, you have application forms, right? You don't even have to go in person, right? And of course, in the pandemic time, you thought everything was shut down. Everything was done online. You don't even go to a class. You don't even engage with your teacher, right? But someone is teaching you. I'm talking about universities, colleges, all of that. So, but in the ancient times, you had to go and stay in the Gurukula, and you had to actually serve your teacher, because there was no fees or payment in kinds or anything like that. But they always gave what they could in terms of the dakshina, guru dakshina, right? And they always start by saying, "May I approach you?" That was the key word. And that basically meant, can I come to you and become your disciple to learn the secret knowledge in your presence, right? And it was a give and take between the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas. And the old terms of reference was the Brahmins gave the knowledge and the Kshatriyas protected it because they are the warriors, right? But some of the Kshatriyas had got, enough wisdom, and they liberated themselves in order to know the secret knowledge of the afterlife, which of course some Vedic scholars from Brahmin sect did not know, and they had to come and learn. So this is telling us that you can learn from anyone, even though, they are of a lesser being than you can still learn from them, right? I'm talking about the modern terms of reference, right? Like I said, you can learn from the beggar. The beggar sits there in one place and just waits. So they should teach you patience, isn't it? Now, when someone gives in food, be thankful, show gratitude, show appreciation. That should teach you something else as well. Okay. So the Shishyas used to serve the gurus in the Gurukulas by doing everything that needed to be doing, by helping each other, by ensuring that, the place was running, the operations were kept running. And the guru's job was just to teach, right? And that's how it went. So two ways in which the Shishyas used to teach or practice what they learned, right? Remember, I spoke about Swadhyaya and Pravarchana, right? Service and continuity, right? That's how they do it. They serve their gurus by continuing what the gurus have taught them and by continuously preaching the same things. So Dhyaya is the practice, Pravarchan is the preaching part, Because at the end of the day, if I come back to what Shankara said, because we're talking about the soul, isn't it? We're talking about the soul, we're talking about the transmigration of the soul, and can the soul be reborn, right? What does Shankara say in Bhaja Govindam, going back, right? Remember, I think it's verse 8 or 9, right? I'm not sure, but I definitely know it's one of those. He says, Kate kanta kaste putraha samsaro yamadiva vichitraha kasya tvam kutaha yahataha tvam chintaya bharata. He's saying, Kate kanta kaste putraha. Kate kanta means who is your wife? Kaste putra means who's your son, who's your daughter? Samsaro yamavichitraha. That means he's saying this samsara is rather unique and strange. Kasyatvam, of whom did you come? Kutaha yataha. From where have you come and where are you going? Statvam chintaya tatha brataha. He says, always think about this, ponder about this. Where have you come? Where are you going? This is the worldly life is a great mysterious enigma, if you like, right? Whose property are you? Where did you come from? Where were you previously before that? Did you exist by yourself? What is the bond between the persons whom you love and worry and work for and yourself? What is that? I mean, when you go, are they going to come with you? Would you see them in the afterlife? Why all this anxiety and attachment for a brief period that you are living in this world as a human, and you feed so much of delusions into this life. That is the truth. That is the truth. So basically, summary of chapter 1, it's talking about birth, rebirth. And remember, I said the life is affected by karma. Karma is not just actions, right? I have said before, specifically, karma relates to thoughts, because it is your thoughts that come out as words, and it is your words that manifest as actions. So all three are related, right? Remember, there's a reference saying what? Thoughts are louder than words, Actions speak louder than words, and thoughts are louder than actions. So watch your thoughts, because your thoughts verily become your words. Your words verily become your actions. So watch your thoughts, words, and actions. That is the focus of chapter 1, right, of the 4 chapters. The second chapter talks about breath and afterlife. Interesting. Breath, or the greatness of breath and afterlife, because the breath in this Upanishad, and not just in this Upanishad, Katha Upanishad also talks, Mandukya Upanishad, Mundaka Upanishad, all these Upanishads talk about breath as a central focus of the breath being personified as Brahman, right? Many Upanishads, breath is compared to the Brahman himself. It is considered the lord of the organs in the body, right? The brain can say, I'm the best. Without me, nothing will happen. The eyes can say, without me, you can't see. The ears can say, without me, you can't hear. Every organ can say they are the greatest in your body. But without breath, nothing is working, right? Nothing will work without breath, right? So it is considered, prana is considered the lord of the organs of the body or the anatomy, right? In this chapter, Rishi Kausitaki, the author of the Kausitaki Upanishad, he compared the breath to Brahma himself. Breath, Brahma. Prana, prajna. Prajna, prana. Life force is consciousness. Consciousness of what? That life itself is verily Brahman. The moment it stops, this body dies, but the soul latches on until, depending on its karmic, account. Either you go back and become something else to solve that, to pay that debt. It is a debt that must be paid, and must be paid only by the person responsible. Not the mother cannot pay for it, the father cannot pay for it, the sister cannot pay for it, the brother cannot pay for it, the husband cannot pay for it, the wife cannot pay for it, the son cannot pay for it, the daughter cannot pay for it, the best friend cannot pay for it, the best enemy cannot pay for it. You and only you can pay for it. Okay? So Rishi Kausitaki also made references to full moon day and half moon day and no moon day in terms of, what sort of activities a person should take into practice in order to evolve from one level to another level. You see, full moon, half moon, and no moon. And always these three, I've spoken about these phases of the moon, right? Half moon, Amavasya. No moon is Amavasya. Full moon is Paurnami. And in between these two, this halfway point. These three are powerful focal points for the evolution of the soul from a bodily perspective, right? So you can do many, many prayers, but that's not the focus of the Upanishads, just giving you the wisdom, right? Not the practicalities. It's a different thing. Now, not strangely, right? Believably, if you ask me, the 5th verse in the 2nd chapter talks about internal sacrifice as opposed to external sacrifice, right? So what is it referring to? So there are lots of verses there that talk about the remaining verses and other types of sacrifices. I'm talking about the ritualistic aspect now, right? The karma kanda, right? From the karma kanda, I said you must catapult yourself to the jnana kanda, right? So this is yet another Upanishad that talks about that same process, right? So breathing is one thing that the 2nd chapter focuses on. And it is what I said to you to do earlier, right? Just to get you into the thing. Long breath in with a short pause of 10 or 15 seconds. And of course, the longer you can elongate the pause, much better. But don't do it, all at once. Breathe in, pause, and then as you breathe out, the breathing in and the breathing out, the time must be the same, right? Then only you learn to breathe properly. That's why they say take deep breath. Deep breath means you don't just exhale, just, in a puff like that, in a huff and puff, so to speak. The time you take, if you take, 20 seconds to inhale, 10 seconds to keep the breath, and then 20 seconds to exhale, he's saying once you do that, by breathing itself, you can recognize the Brahman. That is why those days when they go for the tapasya, they sit in one place and they just meditate. The meditate is by breathing. So, hum, that I am that. So, here, Kausitaki Upanishad, 2nd chapter, talks about that. Okay. It also talks about every single life. So it talks about unity in divinity, Swami says, right? It says you are no different than the other person. So what makes you think you are greater, or that what makes the other person think you are lesser, right? That's why I said to you earlier, to the extent that a person thinks he or she is identical with Brahman, to that extent he or she becomes Brahman. So I have one question for you. Why aren't you Brahman yet? And only you can answer that question. And this is the best part that I like from the 2nd chapter of Kausitaki Upanishad. He says, how long should you pray? Not how long means each time you pray, how long, right? It's not that, whether you pray for 20 minutes or half an hour or 1 hour, or whatever the case may be. It's not asking that. He says, how long in your life as a human being should you pray? You're probably born as a baby, and for a few years, you're left to be, by yourself, completely free by your parents. And then when at your 4 or 5, they start teaching you how to pray. And it becomes an injunction, right? This is how you pray. This is the method you pray, but not why you pray or what is the benefits of prayer and all of that, right? That has never been taught, until much later, until, in modern times. So the Kausitaki Upanishad questions that. How long in your life as a human being, in this journey of a human being, how long must you pray? And instantly it answers that question. Instantly it answers the question. It says, he does not need to pray when he realizes and understands that he or his true self or his true nature is actually identical with the universe. Hence, the focus of the Kausitaki is prana, is prajna. Prajna is prana. The whole thing, when you are breathing, you have to breathe in the inhalation, which is the knowledge and awareness of the conscious thought that you are actually identical with the universe, and the exhalation is taking out all the rubbish that is in there. Can you imagine? I think I said to you, you breathe something like 24,600 times a day, right? Can you imagine with each breath you inhale that you are Brahman, and with each breath you exhale, you're exhaling all the negativities out, all the useless thoughts? Oh, fantastic. No wonder this is saying, just by breathing you can become Brahman. Isn't that the 2nd kosha? Annamaya kosha, pranamaya kosha. When your Annamaya kosha is controlled, your Pranamaya kosha is regulated, then it goes to Manonmaya kosha, becomes regulated. Finish. And the 4th one is Vijnanam, science, reality, which is immutable. Once you tap that, that's it, you're in. Anandamaya kosha. Anandamaya. Just describing what is Ananda is so nice, isn't it? What a state of Ananda. Can you imagine? You haven't even experienced it and you feel so nice just talking about it, just describing it, just defining it. Can you imagine experiencing that ananda? That's the difference between anitya and nitya, impermanence and permanence. Again, Shankara picks on this in his Bhaja Govinda, right? So, and you've had that, I've already done all the entire course with you. So you should already be vibrating at a different level. If you had taken everything that I've said, throughout the Bhaja Govindam, throughout the Karma series, throughout the Bhagavad Gita, 18 chapters, throughout the Ramayana, 7 kanthas, my God, you should be somewhere else. Otherwise, you will continue to go and serve your sense cravings. Muda jahihi danagama trishnam, guru sadbuddhim manasividrishnam, yalla bashe nija karmo bhatam, vittam tena vinodaya chittam. Continuously, dialysis your thoughts. Thoughts must go through dialysis. The process of dialysis is the cleansing, isn't it? Out with the old, in with the new. Every day there must be dialysis. Don't just leave it to be a medical terminology and a medical practice with body parts. Make your mind become, subject to dialysis every day. Then you can live holistically, right? And holy, in a holy way. So it goes on to talk. Remember I said the verse, specific verse in chapter 2, right? Verse 5 actually talks about Agnihotrams and all these karma kandas, rituals, He says, when I say he, I mean, Kausitaki Rishi says, at some point, all the external things that you do, for example, sacrificing all these things in Agnihotrams, in the homams and havans, at some point, these external Agnihotrams must stop, and that must become an internal Agnihotram, which is called the ritual of introspection. The ritual of introspection. And Shankara also states this, right? He reformulates this. He says religion is not supposed to consist in the observance of the external cult, but that which places the whole life with every breath in its service to realize that it is none other than the universe itself. My God. This is one thing that I have found to be consistently the same message, right? It doesn't matter what story I tell you. It doesn't matter what umbrella I give that story, whether it is taken from Bhaja Govindam, whether it is taken from, the karmic concepts, whether it is taken from Bhagavad Gita, whether it is taken from Ramayana, and now whether it is being taken, the wisdom of the Upanishads, whether it is being taken from the Upanishads, the central theme is one. Thoughts, words, actions. Purify that. Minus all desires in life. Live with service and you will reach. What? How much more simple can they make it? Right? Knowledge. Knowledge must be used in the right way. Otherwise, what will happen? Even if you're the most knowledgeable person in the world, like Ravana was, right? 10 heads, I told you, represented Shikshastras and the 4 Vedas. No one was more knowledgeable than him. No one ever lived to have accumulated as much knowledge as Ravana. That's why he was given the title of Iswaran, Ravaneswaran, right? And only 2 have got that title. And again, I've mentioned this before, Ravaneswaran and Shaniswaran, Lord Shaniswaran. Lord Shani is, one of the guardian planets of the Navagrahas. So you see, chapter 2 beautifully talks about knowledge. So you do something, what is the knowledge that once you've got that knowledge, you don't have to continue doing it, isn't it? Isn't it? Perfect that knowledge, not perfect the ritual that gives you the knowledge. Let me repeat that. Perfect the knowledge aspect. Don't perfect the rituals that give you that knowledge. It's no point because you've already got that knowledge. Now you perfect that knowledge. The classic thing, and I always make a reference to this. I said, is somebody pointing to the moon. Look, 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 there's a moon there. And if people only watch the finger or are only focused on the finger, then they don't see the moon. But through the finger, if they go and see the moon, then they don't need the finger anymore because they've got the knowledge of where to see the moon. And Shankara then also says it's not rituals, but knowledge that should be the pursuit of all, life beings. So the second chapter talks about all lives as being Brahman, the universal soul, the eternal being. That's why they say you are a fabric of the entire universe. When you go, you merge back. And then if there is a rebirth, you come out again, right? The whole idea is you are never apart. You are never away from me. You are in close proximity, living in my midst. But I'm giving you this opportunity to evolve in the rebirth and come back and join me so that there is no more rebirth. You're born but once, you die but once. So that's what summary is. That's the summary of chapter 2. All lives belong to that one universal soul, and all life are actually part of that one universal soul. And to the extent that you realize this, you are identical. To the extent that you don't realize this, you are unidentical. And until your purpose of life is to become identical and have that realization that you are no different, then you are at a constant stage and you can smile, have that mandahasa, continuous smile at any point in time. And of course, praying. How long do you have to pray? Stop praying, start living, start becoming the prayer. Start living the prayer, start becoming the prayer. So it doesn't mean that only if you pray, God will listen to you. No. If you walk the talk, you talk the talk, that's enough. That is God, God in action, right? So stop, think, and then proceed. Stop, look, go, right? So stop and think, how far have you come? What are you doing? Where do you want to go? And then look at all the options that are open and then go, choose your path, See, the third chapter is talking about the Lord of the Swargaloka, which is Indra, Indra Deva or Devendra, Lord of the heavens. And he is talking to a Kshatriya warrior called Devo Dasha. Devo Dasha is a Kshatriya warrior, and he wanted to talk to Indra because Indra has attained the highest knowledge of Brahman. But because sometimes he gives in to his thoughts, which are more sense-based or organ-based, he is remaining at that level. And many times, if you go through the Puranas, it will tell you Indra was displaced from his position and taught a lesson, and then he goes back, So it's like a vicious circle. This also talks about, this chapter also talks about, how to become sinless. It's fantastic, some of the things that you discover when you go through this. How to become sinless. And it gives you one single answer, right? Just purify your thoughts. How is that possible? Well, if you purify your thoughts and your thoughts are totally sinless, in thinking you are sinless, then in speaking you'll become sinless, and in acting you'll become sinless. So you see how easy, just thought process. Think good for everybody. Say only good things and do only good things. What's so difficult in that? Difficult because you're not conditioned to think that way. It's difficult because you're not conditioned to speak that way. And it's definitely difficult because you're not conditioned to act that way. So the Kausitaki Upanishad is telling you, if you look, we call this the wisdom of the Upanishads. Now, this is the wisdom. Just change your thoughts. You change your thoughts, you change your words. You change your words, you change your actions. When you change your thoughts, words, and actions, you become a different person, 100%. This is what the Western, personal development courses are talking about. Exactly the same thing, right? And it also talks about the superiority of prana or breath as being the most important thing. Are you who? In your are you who, your prana is the most important thing. That is why when they start a temple, when they build a temple, and the opening is called, Kumbha Abhishekam, which is the tip, right? The Kalasha is at the top of the temple. They go and wash it down. But inside, when they come, they give breath or life breath to the deities. This is called Prana Pratishthabanaha. Prana Pratishthabanaha. Right? But for you, you are already given breath. Can you imagine? So, what is the delay in you connecting or making that link with the divine? You need to ask that. Right? So basically, the third chapter is saying, a person's life is not measured by time, but by the number of breaths he takes, and by the number of breaths that make him become aware that he is Brahman or that is God. You breathe, like I said, 24,600 times, whatever the case may be. How many times do you breathe thinking God is there? How many times do you breathe thinking, thank you for giving me whatever you have given me? How many times do you breathe and realize you are breathing? What does the third chapter say? It says, breathe slowly, not in a huff and puff. Those who breathe slowly, those people are the ones who can suspend their breath and can live longer compared to those who do not control or regulate the breath. Again, a direct connotation to Pranamaya Kosha. Slow down your breathing. And in that slow, lengthy breathing, realize that prana is prajna and prajna is prana. Oh, wonderfully, they have said these things. We let them go. This is the metaphysical definition of human being is actually consciousness. Consciousness is Atman. Atman is soul. Right? How do we define human beings? Let's talk about that. How do we define human beings? That person is a wonderful human being because he speaks so well. Really? So you define a human being because they have the power of speech? Well, then what about those people who are dumb? Who do not have the power of speech, who have lost it for some reason or other? Are they not human beings? Do you define human beings by sight? Those who cannot see them? Those who are blind? What about them? They are not human beings. Hearing can define a human being. What about those who cannot hear? Those who are deaf? By birth sometimes by accident, sometimes by illness. Are they not fit to be treated as human beings? By someone who says a strong mind, wonderful character, beautiful attitude. Yeah. What about those people who lose their minds? Mindless, thoughtless, aimlessly wandering the roads, streets, asking the question, what has happened? What's happened? Right? Mind also cannot define human beings. Arms or legs? What about people who don't have arms, people who don't have legs? You cannot define a human being. What defines a human being, therefore, is only one thing, and that is life, breath, life, force. Hence, coming back to the root word, prana is prajna, prajna is prana. So with every breath you take, realize, and not only you are breathing, isn't it? The person next to you, the person you know, the person you don't know, the person you like, the person you don't like, the person you love, the person you don't love. Everybody is breathing. So you see how this chapter says you and the other person is exactly the same. Right? Prana, life force, is prajna, consciousness. And that which is conscious has life force. Prana is prajna, prajna is prana. What more you want? Right? And it says, as long as you are focused or dependent on sense object or sense organs, you will never tap into the integrative psychological powers of the mind. What I said to you earlier. But once you start to ignore the demands and the callings of the sense objects, Once you start to look beyond the callings and the demands of the sense organs, then you are slowly tapping into that psychological workshop that can control the mind. Everything is the mind. Indriyas. Remember, they are called Indriyas so that you can become like Indra. Pancha Indriyas, Karma Indriyas, Jnana Indriyas, Indra is telling, everything is telling you, you can become Indra, provided you do it properly, you do it the right way, you do it for the right reason, at the right time, for the right purpose. That's why it says the one who knows the self through his breathing, with each breathing, Aham Brahmasmi, Tattvam Asi, Prajnanam Brahma, I am Atman Brahma. 4 Vedas. Every day you breathe what? Now, can you imagine if you are 55 or 56 years old and you're thinking, my God, for the last 56 years, so for the past 55 years, for the past 40 years, for the past 30 years, I have not been doing this. Well, start today. Isn't it? You're still alive, right? So, don't delay. Start today because you never know how long you have left. Isn't it? So start as soon as possible. You've got the knowledge, now perfect the knowledge. That's the message, right? So we go to chapter 4. Chapter 4 again is a conversation between a Brahmin and a Kshatriya scholar, right? The Brahmin was called Balaki, Gargya Balaki, and the Kshatriya was actually a king. His name was Ajatashatru. So, and the conversation was, what's the difference between you and me? You preach non-violence, but I protect you by exerting violence. Watch this. This seems like a bit of a juxtaposition here. So, the Kshatriya king, Ajatashatru, said, my job is to protect all of you who give knowledge, and my citizens who depend on me, and also all the temples and the heritage and dharma. To do that, I exert violence or himsa, whereas you, as a Vedic scholar, you preach ahimsa. So does that mean I can never become Brahman because I'm engaged in violence? Does that mean you have a quicker journey, and you have a quicker journey because I have protected you? So where is the fairness? A very, very valid question, right? This is where the word dharma comes in. Remember, I said karma and dharma, there's a connotation. And I also spoke about this, not just when I was doing karma, the three weeks, but I also spoke about this when I did Bhagavad Gita, which is why I did the 3 weeks of karma before I started Bhagavad Gita. And I also touched on some aspects of karma when I was doing Ramayana, right? Part of dharma. So if you discharge your dharma properly and you do not expect any fruits from the actions that you have executed, then you're fine. How many of us can do that? We do a small thing and we want a big, newspaper advertisement and, national recognition. We want award and you want reward, right? You want award, you want reward all the time. Oh, this is the conversation, right? And the crux of it is, it doesn't matter. You have to do it. And what you're doing is your dharma. Do it for the right reason. Do it at a time when it needs to be done. And then do not attach yourself to the fruits of your actions, provided your actions was dharmic. Then yes, you don't have to worry. My journey and your journey is exactly the same, right? Because on the one hand, it's a balance, isn't it? On the one hand, I am protecting some person who's giving knowledge and is looking after the temple, doing all the pujas and all of that, by exerting violence on the person who might get in the way of the other person, isn't it? So there's a balance between violence and non-violence. Dharma. Dharma samsthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. Even that God will come down and take form when dharma is threatened, when righteousness is suppressed by unrighteousness. Even God will come down and take form. So this is what made the Kshatriya Ajashatru become an immortal, right? So very interesting, this fourth chapter story, the conversation between, Ajashatru and Gargi, Balaki, the two. So what can we take away from this at the end of the day, right? What is the value? The value is truth. The value is your Atman, isn't it? Isn't it? I want to repeat a story that I have said, probably during my Bhajagovindam session, right? But it's always good to repeat stories that have an impact. And people remember the story. So if you remember the story, you should remember the principle, right? Anyway, so since we're talking about the truth, that Atman and Parabrahman are one, right? And Atman is your soul. That means you, your soul, and Atman are all one, the one line of lineage, right? One single line, it's a linear line. Right, so the man who had 4 wives, right? He loved the 4th wife very dearly. And he would get her, the richest of gifts, the nicest of clothes, finest jewelry, always wants her to dress very nicely, and he entertains her all the time. And likewise, she loved him too, in the same way he loved her. But he also loved his 3rd wife. The 3rd wife was also very dear to him. And also he would give her everything. But she was the one who controlled, everything in his life. Okay. Then the 2nd wife, he also loved her, right? He was also confident in her. She was the one to whom he would, he treated her as his confidante, as his personal counselor, if you like. He would talk to her about his personal matters, about, everything that affects his work, his livelihood. She was always there. She was, for him, the 2nd wife was very important to him. And then his 1st wife was there. He wasn't too attached to her, first wife. She was always there, where is she going to go? She was modest, always trying to live up to his expectations, if you like, So one day he fell ill, right? And the physicians came and they said, well, this is it. I think, you've reached the end of your journey, your road. You're going to go maybe in 1 or 2 days, might even be tomorrow, So when he heard that, he summoned all his wives and gathered around him. And he said, now look, my beautiful wives, I have been told that, I have not much time left. I probably will die tomorrow or in the day after that at the very latest. But I do not want to die alone. I want, one of you to come with me. So he called his 4th wife and he said, you are the dearest to my heart. I've always loved you. I've given you the best of everything. The time has now come for me to die. Will you come with me and keep me a company in the afterlife? The wife said, nothing doing. No, she turned her back and walked away quickly. His heart was broken, right? Then he called his 3rd wife and he said, I'm going to die. Will you come with me at least, and be with me? She says, no way. The moment you die, I'm going to be with somebody else. That is life. She turned her back and she also went away, right? Then he called his 2nd wife and asked her the same question. And she too said, I'm sorry that you are dying, but I can only come to the cemetery. And I will wait until, whatever they do and they are finished. And then only I will go back to my home and do what I need to do, Then he suddenly heard a voice from the back saying, I will come with you. And he looked and he saw his 1st wife. And he felt very sad because she is willing to come with him, right? He said, my dear, I've always neglected you. I have always neglected you. I never paid any attention to you like I did with the other 3 wives. You look so skinny. You look so, undernourished. My life has come to an end and I wish I knew that this is how you loved me this much. more than all the others that I have been spending my time with. I feel very sad that I've neglected you all this time, and saying that he died. Now, in the story, now I'm going to tell you the crux of the story, right? The fourth wife represents the body and its cravings. We will lose the body when we die. The third wife represents wealth, which others get when you die. Remember, the third wife says, the moment you go, I'm going to go with someone else. That is wealth. Your wealth is never your wealth. Temporarily, you got something, you make use of it, right? After that, it goes to someone else and someone else. And so that's the nature of wealth. It goes round and round and round. The second wife represents all your friends and family who will only come up to your graveyard. You know, there's a beautiful song written and sung by TMS, an old song, you know, Veedu varai uravu, Veedi varai manaivi, Kaadu varai pillai, Kadasi varai yaro. Basically, that means Veedi varai uravu means all your friends and relatives will come to the house. Veedi varai manaivi means the wife will come up to the street, end of the street, to watch the hearse go. Kaadu varai pillai, your son will come to the graveyard or the cemetery to do the final rites. And the last line is Kadasi varai yaro, who will come with you till the end. That is the first wife. She represents the soul. Soul. It's always there. The soul is always there, but it's unnoticed, just like the man in the story completely ignored and neglected it. Right? Unnoticed, neglected, but most dearest and most important, because when you die, the soul comes and then it departs. It comes with you for some time. Then it departs, depending on your karma. First chapter, karma. So, life offers you so much to learn, right? You have to learn to grow spiritually stronger, because only when you're spiritually stronger, you can detach. Otherwise, you know, you become an instrument, and even if it's broken and you keep playing, you don't get any, joy out of it, isn't it? So you got to think, what am I doing for my soul? Right? Swami always says, isn't it? You don't ask for interview, ask for inner view. Inner view is what is lacking, right? So that is Kausitaki Upanishad. Wonderful, wonderful Upanishad, right? When you read it, it gives you so much of information, I mean, just like all the Upanishads, they're all wonderful. That's why they give you so much of wisdom, right? And hence the series is called Wisdom of the Upanishads. Anyada sharanam nasti tvameva sharanam mamaha tasmat karunya bhavena raksharaksha maheshwaraha harihi om tatsat narayana pranamastu.